What if our youth can grow up conscious and resilient? What tools would allow our children to be thriving and joyful? Welcome to the Growing Up Conscious Show with Kathleen Connor. Welcome back to the Growing Up Conscious Show. I'm your host, Kathleen Connor. And on this show, Growing Up Conscious, it's for people ages 2 to 202 that are engaged in creating a conscious, aware, joyful life and living. So after raising 2 sons and teaching for over 25 years, I was training in consciousness work and energetic body work and facilitating classes for access consciousness. And through that process, one of my targets for this particular show is for youth, parents, and teachers to have the tools and the strategies to consciously create the life they desire. And along that vein, today I have a phenomenal guest. Her name is Dr. Terrie Hope. Dr. Terrie Hope, in case you haven't heard of her, just in case you haven't heard of her, is an internationally renowned expert and scientist in the field of personal, business, and scientific-based transformation and leadership. Wow. She's a pioneer thought leader exploring new frontiers and research on stress, health, well-being, and human potential. Those are topics that I love to talk about. She holds a PhD and doctorate with advanced studies in quantum medicine, transformation, and consciousness, and has published multiple scientific research studies related to neuroactivity, anxiety, depression, and changes in stress levels and consciousness. Great to have you on the show, Terrie.
Thank you. And great to be here. Oh my gosh, such a pleasure.
Yes. Terrie and I both went to a place called El Lugar Resort in Costa Rica recently, and we had lots of great conversations. So I wanted to get her on my show. Since I teach a bodywork class called the Access Bars that I was trained in with Access Consciousness, I was personally first interested in Terrie a couple of years ago because she was starting research in regards to how this bodywork supports people lowering their stress, anxiety, depression, things like that. And I didn't really need any scientific proof myself, but I do know for some people that having that kind of data is really useful before they'll try something or even after they try something so that they kind of can make it fit in their world. But that's how I sort of, followed you at first, Terrie. But then, there's so many other topics with you being a doctor that we discussed when I was in Costa Rica with you. And one thing that comes to mind is, as a doctor, you must regularly see that there are many things that work, but like, how do you have the credibility for people to kind of show them that it works? So we'll talk about that a little bit, but before we get into that, if you'd give me a little bit of your backstory on how you kind of chose the path you did to end up where you are doing this kind of research and being a doctor.
Well, that's a really great question because I started working in the world of complementary medicine, we'll call it, or studies. I would say now I'm going to kind of date myself almost 40 years ago. And just started going, wow, there's so many possibilities here. And I really mean possibilities that if you have a headache and now you do this and then the headache is gone in a matter of minutes without having to use something that's pharmaceutically based was really curious and interesting to me. It sort of turned on my eyes, and I was brought up by a dentist and a nurse who were well suited in that world, but also stretched sort of beyond it. And I added a lot of things to my practice over time, including, neurofeedback, almost every possible thing that you could have in a practice. And I was really interested in human nature, always have been. Human nature and how we get ourselves twisted and untwisted from our what we create as challenges in life and how to have a life with ease. So that kind of is where I started. And about 14 years ago, I went to an event and I tried this thing called Access Bars. And I was happy. I just went there actually to figure out how people were marketing their business. To me, that was kind of interesting. I was happy. I went for a 20-minute session. I got off the table and I went, I am so happy. But I was already happy. So how do you become more happy when you're already happy? And I was like, wow. And they had a huge practice of people with anxiety and depression. And that was my time major focus and still pretty much is. I went, if it would do this for someone who's happy, what will it do for people who are really not, who are looking to have that kind of happiness? Let me put
Yes.
it like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was so delighted and curious about what it could be for other people. So after a couple of years, I went, I don't know, I had one of those moments where I'm just going to go research this. Like I'm going to do scientific research. And I chose that. And, there's different kinds of ways of being a scientist. And one of them is to be a research scientist, which is to look at things and see if they work, how they work, that they work. Not
Yeah.
necessarily like putting two things together and creating a new invention. Not quite, but I'm on it. So that was sort of my introduction to it. And it's interesting because you were talking about how access bars, not everybody requires information or science or data to know that something works. They'll just go try it, just like I did. I went, I'm just going to go try this. I have no idea what it is in a completely foreign environment, which I never would do that. But I just somehow knew that I wanted that. And so not everybody does. But what was really interesting to me as you were mentioning that, I went, it's not that I required it and not that I believe that people require it. But what's fascinating to me is when I look at the results, they are so dramatic compared to anything else in the world. It's not that it worked, it's to the degree that it worked, that was just astounding to me. To the degree of change that was seen and continues to be seen in the research that I do. So for me, it's like fascinating to go, wow, it's not just and it worked. It's
Yeah.
like, holy crumb,
Yeah.
like, did it ever work? And that kind of actually brings more curiosity about, wow, I don't need to know and most people in the science world want to know the mechanism of action. And you can't really do mechanism of action when you're doing consciousness or energy. There's no mechanism of action. There's no quantifiable here. I'm going to give you 1 gram of energy, or I'm going to release 1 gram of energy. It kind of
Yeah.
doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah.
But it does show us a lot. It does show us a lot about our capacities as beings and how we can actually what I'll call move the needle to more well-being and happiness really quickly. And that's what's interesting to me. It's like so fast.
Well, I especially, I'm one of those people that, maybe I'm too extreme with it, but I don't even have aspirin in my house because I'm so, not that I don't have some supplements, but I'm one of those people that if I can change something in a way that isn't too intrusive to my body,
Hmm.
I will do that. And I see the way, especially with mental health labels like depression and anxiety and things like that, that if there's a way that we can address those without having to take, pharmaceuticals that might have side effects that we really don't want, then I'm all about that too,
Hmm.
So any way where we can show that, hey, here's some alternatives you can try, because I was that teacher on the school team for many years, being a special ed teacher where we'd be talking about a child and, a lot of people on the team would go right to, well, maybe we should talk to the parents about medication. And I'd be like, well, yeah, but there's always side effects with medication. And I'm not saying that medication isn't the way to go for some people. Maybe that's what works best for some people. But I'm like, there's so many other things we can attempt before we do that, you know? So I so appreciated the research that you did around the access bars and any kind of, like who comes to mind is Joe Dispenza because he's done so much research to show that things like meditation work, and various other things, right? And when I go to sit to read his book, I'm like, okay, you don't have to prove it to me anymore. There's give people so many studies in there because he
I
is trying
know,
to show the people that need that, you know what I mean?
I know. And it's funny because I used to be on his research team for the first
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah, and then all his advanced, workshops. I used to do, um, brain mapping, map people's brains before and after his
Yes.
workshops to see what the changes were, and he was always and which is great. Like, he was always looking to go, "How do we get it so this is something real in people's worlds?" But I always look at it and go, as human beings, as beings,
Yes.
we have this incredible capacity to change things
Yes.
quickly without needing to go like it sort of devolves us away from our unique capacities to actually live well, happy, and enjoy life to move over into the world of necessity of kind of dampening down our capacities to change, like taking medication, like, and I'm not saying medication is wrong, but there are so many options today where it's like, oh wow. And we are so powerful.
Yes.
Like we are so powerful.
Yes, and we being like, like something like the access bars, one person puts their hand on another person's head and touches certain points, right? So also we can contribute so much to each other without coming from trying to fix somebody or save somebody, but coming from like, hey, let me put my hands on you. That contribution we can be to each other energetically is amazing to me too, because being trained as a teacher, I it wasn't till I mean, I had trained in neurolinguistic programming and the body talk system and yoga calm for children and all these things, but I didn't feel like we were talking about how people get their credibility when we were chatting on the bus on the airport in Costa Rica. And it's so funny, like I didn't feel like I had the credibility to share these amazing things that I was learning because I didn't feel like they fit in this reality. So it wasn't till I did some of the training with access consciousness where I'm like, oh, there's this thing that we call intellectual property. I love that way they put it, where they might use it a different way in the world, but it's almost like you have to prove your intellectual property about something, which is interesting. And that aspect of showing some data around something and having that have credibility, I do understand where that's useful as well.
Well, and it's interesting because you talk about schools, and I know, you've been a teacher and you've done that. And there was an interesting report out of the UK that was done in quite a large number of students. And it was looking at the well-being of teachers. And does the well-being of teachers actually influence children? Does it actually have an influence on the well-being and how the teachers, the children do? And they also at the end said they needed to continue to research that. And also, how well the children do also influences the teacher's well-being. So this thing about contribution, even
Yes.
though it's not spoken to necessarily that way, it's all being written in other ways in journals and in publications that are about looking at how one thing influences, I don't mean influences, but contributes to the other.
And yeah, I think influences too, because I look at the days as a teacher where I wasn't my most resourceful. Like, let's say I didn't have enough sleep, and for a period of time, I was a single mom. Um, and I would say something to a student that I would regret. And then if I caught myself quick enough, I'd be like, sorry, that's not you. it's me, because, it's my well-being issue that is having me not interact with you in a way that I would consider the way that I would like to, so I definitely, I mean, I did some trainings as a teacher where they talked about how you take care of yourself in order to be able to do your job. And I think it's hugely important for teachers to be taking care of themselves and addressing that if they're going to be at school interacting with a lot of students. Yes.
Well, yeah, for sure. But I was curious for them to talk about how that was true and also how kids could influence teachers' well-being.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like if I'm tense about something or something's bothering me, I often will go for a walk, and just seeing other people's animals and children will help shift my energy. Because animals, those dogs that come up to you like, hi, 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 that kind of energy. And kids can be that way too. Young kids can be just this like, vulnerable space or sweet space that just helps you shift back to that possibility.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. So we looked together at um when I'm looking at parents making choices about their kids, or teachers making choices about their students, or any kind of youth organization looking at how to support those that are growing up at a time that's pretty complex.
That would be true.
Pretty complex, like in terms of all that is bombarding them in terms of social media and TV and this and that and the other thing, right? I had some of that growing up, but luckily I had a lot more outdoor time and not much time spent even putting my attention on that, right? So giving support to those that are growing up at these interesting times, it's it's one of those things where parents are looking at, okay, my child is struggling in school, or my child is having this concern or that concern. Who do I go to support me? And that's where I think some people give away their own awareness because of somebody else's credentials. Have you seen
Mhm.
that happen as well?
Oh, oh yeah. Like
Yeah.
and all the time. Because we believe that if someone is credentialed, we need to take off our own knowing hat, so to speak, and listen to
Yeah.
only those who have credentials. And it's really funny because I would say that I am aware of Instagram, and there are things that come into my Instagram feed that sometimes I get good ideas, and sometimes I hear stuff that I just go, really? Like, really? You've got to be kidding me, from people who are credentialed.
Yes.
And what they're sharing isn't necessarily that which is actually improves the quality of living for people on the planet. And people would go, well, I know this guy's a neuroscientist, therefore he must he must know.
Right.
But I went, it's not exactly just because he can do stuff with brains doesn't mean makes him an authority on so many other things. And I think that it's easy for us as individuals to go, this person knows more. They've gone to school, they have a white coat, or they have a captain's hat, or a something or other, and they have a little more educational knowledge on certain things.
Yes.
And then my question is that are they the experts, or can you use what they have to say as information?
Yes.
Information rather than making it true.
Yes. And even sitting with the question, is this relevant to me? Or
Mhm.
what parts of this are relevant? Because what I've noticed in the news these last couple of years is sometimes there's some truth, and then there's kind of like something thrown in there that might not be true, or might not be true for everyone, you
Mhm.
know, like anyone
Yeah.
that tries to say that all people should be eating a certain way, even though we're all different, we all have different bodies. And, when I read the blood type book, before that, I mean, I went through a period when I was young where I was like a self-righteous vegetarian, but my body was not thriving on that diet. Some people do thrive on that diet, you know?
Mhm.
And so I just, there's so much I've seen because again, I right now I have a son in medical school, like what they consider important or what they don't consider important, and how to look at your own awareness and really build that muscle of having your own awareness and asking yourself questions, knowing that you can follow your own awareness.
So important. And it's really funny because a number of hours ago, I was working, excuse me, with a client who now lives in Geneva. And she created a, a risk thing around cancer. And she was so frightened that she finally had her breast removed
Mm.
to find out she had no cancer.
Oh,
Like, and they said, well, we can't really tell because there's a scar now from where we biopsied, so it could possibly be cancer. So kept her going down the road of being fearful. So she was in another country at the time. Now she's in a totally different country and still is fearful of having cancer because she was told she has to go every year for a test to prove whether she has cancer or she doesn't have cancer. And I went, that's a really difficult choice because when you start talking the word cancer, it's one of those things you may want to pay attention to or you may not want to pay attention to.
yeah,
But the degree of fear in her world because of what they've said about cancers, like you're never cancer free once you had it. I said, well, it's kind of interesting because you never had cancer to begin with. But now you're
yes,
following this protocol as though you had had cancer. And I was like, wow, that is so interesting. And how can, so, good medical information, you prove, we proved you didn't have cancer, and now we're treating you like you do have cancer, and you're still at risk of having cancer. And then I was like, how can you use that information of all the tests
yeah,
and all the information that comes back to your advantage? Can you
yes,
use it to just go, ah, it's good.
yes. Especially when you look at, there's so much research out there now that our thoughts, perhaps our feelings and emotions as well, can impact our body in so many different ways. So if we're convinced that our body has something like cancer, then we can create it. We're powerful, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's another thing to be aware of, is like that aspect of where to put our attention with something like that, because we're such a powerful being.
I know.
And those, so that piece, and then also one of my favorite tools to use, because I didn't have it when I was young, is asking, is this mine or somebody else's? So if you have a fear around something like cancer, is this mine, or am I aware of everyone's fear around cancer? Like
Mhm.
before I get on a horse, if I have fear, I'm like, is this mine or somebody else's? Because a lot of people have fear around horseback riding, right?
So you're saying we're aware.
Yes. No, not us. No.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
and it's kind of interesting because this whole topic of awareness and how people have awareness, and it's being cited more and more now, where awareness is such a great tool, and how we can learn how to use it to our advantage so it doesn't work against us. Like I'm about to get on a horse and I'm sensing fear and then recognizing the fear is not even yours. And then you can have a good ride rather than staying on the horse and going, I'm so afraid, and like being petrified.
Right. And if it is, I mean, if you, it's still great to ask the question before you get on the horse. Okay, horse, are now, are you going to take good care of me? And like energetically get a sense of that. So it's not overriding your awareness either, but just asking, mine, okay, are mine or not mine? And then also being like, okay, I am aware of something here. What actually is it? You know?
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of things like, your results with the access bars were showing specifically that it lowered can you speak a little bit more about what the numbers showed that would be useful for people that are looking at any kind of body work that way?
Well, what if they're not looking for body work? What if
Well,
they're just looking for
okay.
something to be different?
Yes. Yes.
Because I would
That's
go,
what I mean.
when you go body work, not to make it wrong, but it's like, is it
What's
body
that?
or is it like, it's like, oh, because it doesn't really work on any, like it's not work.
Yes.
Um, but it's like, are people asking for something to be different? And what is it that they're looking for to be different? And from that, I would say that I would say in the results that I got when I looked at, I've done several studies that looked at depression, anxiety, stress, pain, and PTSD. Those would be the 5 so far. Um, and the most astounding ones, though, was one of the ones where I looked at brains and I did all kinds of measurements because I wasn't really sure what would come out of it and different ways to measure things so I would be accurate in my research. And what occurred was there was this group of people in one of the first studies I did on anxiety and depression. And all the people had what's called trait anxiety. And what that is like you live that way. It's a trait. It's like how you walk through life. It's like, some people have their head kind of sideways. It's like a trait. Well, in this case, it's people walk through the world as being anxious and seeing the world through anxious eyes. Really challenging to ever change because it's kind of how they see the world, live in the world. So all of the participants had trait anxiety. And then in the scores, when after what they received was one 90-minute access bar session. And when it came to anxiety, the mean scores, which means the total of all the scores, and then it would take the average for doing science,
Yes.
was an 84.7% decrease
Wow.
overall. And so it's like you can't make that up. And
Significant. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
when it comes to trait anxiety, it seldom changes. So when you can look at, to me, I'm not in a world of like hopeful, but I go, wow, if it can create that much change in anxiety for people who have profound anxiety as part of how they live, it kind of brings me to a place of how many more people could live anxiety free if they could have the chance to actually receive an access bar session. And I'm not saying that all people would receive that percentage decrease, and some people would require more than one session to maybe move to where they want to be for their level of ease and happiness and being free of anxiety. But it was substantial and it was fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings me to also because of being a teacher for so many years, one thing I'm interested in that people are doing is bringing the access bars into schools
Mhm,
because you can benefit both the teachers and the students. Because as
mhm.
you talked about earlier, like teachers receiving bars could bring down um, stress levels, possibly,
Yeah.
and then kids receiving bars, if both the teachers and the kids are coming from less stress, less anxiety, it just opens up the possibility of more learning potential.
Yeah, and it was interesting because there was another study that I looked at in the UK, and what they found was that kids they broke down the kids into 3 distinct age categories. And what they found was the older the group was, the more anxiety they had. So progressing over age, actually they became more anxious. And what they also found in that study is that it was connected to decreases in, so the more anxious the kids were, the less well they performed in education. So if we can change the resilience and the anxiety projection and trajectory for young people, they would actually perform better, not only as it related to education, but for the rest of their lives. Because there's certainly more research on what that looks like when you underperform in one area, what that creates as a mental health trajectory for living. So for me, when I think about what access bars could do in schools, if people could just, I know that it creates this level of peace and concentration and resilience so that things that come into their world, they're not as reactive to, they have way more resilience. And with that resilience, they respond better in all aspects of living.
Yeah.
That was
Yes.
what I looked at and went, it could be remarkable having this in as many education centers as we can so that the elements of anxiety and things that keep kids challenged or having behavior issues could really change everything.
Yes, I agree. And just knowing that how many how many people I know now that once they started doing bars regularly, they actually got off medication they were on for things like anxiety and yeah, other mental health things. I mean, certainly that's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. Everyone's different, and what works for each person is different. But that aspect of being able to be more naturally balanced um, through using these kinds of tools is encouraging from my perspective. Yeah.
That's a better word than hopeful, but yeah, encouraging is great because it's like just another piece that we can bring that allows everybody to thrive, including kids.
Yes, I agree. Is there more that you'd like to speak about in regards to, let's say, a parent of somebody that has the label of ADD, ADHD, autism spectrum, LD, any of those, and they're having, along with that, some anxiety or some, stressful time at school or depression or any number of things. How do parents navigate what actually would work for them in terms of finding a mentor support person with that process?
Well, it goes back to our original conversation about taking your sense of knowing and handing it over to somebody else versus getting that sense of self that you have and maybe drawing in all kinds of information from different resources and people and experts. And then there's you, the expert who's lived with your son or daughter this long in life, and you have a sense of what you know and what it is that they will respond to in a way that will work. Because we all have this very incredible strength and sense of knowing that we often dismiss because we're not used to using it as a muscle. But it's actually how sharks have survived on the planet longer than any other species before they were here before man were, because they have this strong sense of knowing. When something changes like this, they have this sense of knowing that they're in danger and they go do something. It's instantaneous and it's a sense. You don't have to think about it. So
Yes.
now you have this, you're someone who has ADD or are neurodiverse, we'll call it, and gather the information and then look at it and go, what is it in your own sense that will bring the greatest possibility, and not only short term, but long term. Like, what will this bring as a trajectory to their lives? And how can I have it be beneficial? And if I had any input at all, if you can find somebody who can do access bars, even a short session for someone who is hyperactive, um, who requires a sense of peace and calm. If you can find somebody in your area, anyone, reach out to me. I'll find you somebody. Um, you might find that it actually helps them tremendously to get that sense of peace and calm that will actually help change how their life works.
Yes, yes, I can see that, you know, it's worth it for me to reach out to schools and at least ask and see who's open to that possibility in a school, like schools that are more innovative or are willing to be kind of beyond the typical, just to allow something different to shift the
Mhm.
whole school culture that way. Now, before we, share more details with the audience around how they can reach you if they'd like to, I'd also just like to get your perspective. Like if you were talking to a large group of parents, so they could be from anywhere, a diverse group of parents, and you only had a short while to share some tools that you think could make the whole process of either parenting or supporting your child, anything that would be like a tool you could hand them, what are some things you would share?
Wow, that's a really I would share everything. Um, I would share everything.
Yes.
What would be a tool that I would share? I think the first one would be to what I first described as don't give up your knowing to anyone else, because that level of empowerment for you as an individual, you are always in charge of your life. Nobody else is. You created it. We all create our lives, and we all create the stuff that works and the stuff that doesn't work. And to have that sense of knowing really brings to life how much we are truly in charge. And so I would say the first thing I would do is never let go of your knowing and navigate life from it's kind of a you do things sometimes, and sometimes you get it so it works for you, and then you make choices, and sometimes it's not your wisest choice, but it also gives you a wealth of information about what that is. So just to navigate from really we have so much knowing and power internally that if we can use the information around us as information, not authority,
Yeah,
like
I think
authority over.
right. I think I was also add to that is like trust your child's knowing too,
Yeah.
because I think I was sharing with you that I took my son when he was young to a therapist to see if it could help with some of his stress level. And I don't think she was that used to working with young kids, but she was trying her best. But my son, like, he finally just like begged me not to have to go anymore. And I'm like, I got to trust his awareness because it's not shifting anything for him and it's adding more anxiety. And it really wasn't anybody's fault. I think it's just she didn't know what to do with somebody like him. And I just had to trust that he was telling me, hey, mom, this is not the thing. This is not the thing that's going to support change for me. So,
Well, yeah.
if asking your kids questions and getting their own, feedback. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. And that's a thing. We have knowing from the time we're born. We aren't, we don't have to wait to become adults to have knowing. You ever notice that kids will say the most obscure and freaking brilliant thing all at the same time? And they haven't been even around the planet long enough to acquired that, but they're so tapped into everything. They're not living in so much judgment and in their head so much
Yeah.
that they have this sense that is so remarkable. And you're correct, is like they have knowing. So when you listen to a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, when they're actually telling you what they know about something, it is so rich. And for us to I was brought up with parents who dissed me. I wasn't old enough to know anything. Yeah, not so much.
Yeah.
But I didn't buy any of that. It was more like, "Oh my god, can they get this?" But the thing is that for us to actually empower people to get that sense of knowing that what they are and what their sense of knowing is, no matter how old they are, is the beginning of the allows people to thrive, so they don't go into self-doubt about what they know.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. And, we know from seeing it that kids can have all sorts of capacities, even like that they might be sensing ghosts and we don't see the ghosts, all sorts of different things that we might not understand, but just being able to kind of go with that and trust them and ask them what they know, I think is key. And as you were saying, to trust your awareness, but then part of it as a parent too is to stop judging yourself, because it's so easy when you're trying to be a good parent to, like, you know, judge yourself about things too. So letting go of judgment, because that doesn't help at all, in terms of parenting.
It doesn't actually bring things on track to where what's gonna actually get you to a place that actually works when you dive into the world of, "Oh, I think I made a wrong choice here," and then judge yourself for weeks. I mean, ever known people that sit there and they do something and they kinda made a wrong turn somehow, and then they spend weeks, going over it in their head and basically making themselves wrong, when if you just went, "Hmm, that kinda didn't work out right. What do I need to know here and next?" And spend less than I mean, when I do that now, I'm kinda less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think a very empowering thing that I heard probably from Gary Douglas was this aspect of 10 seconds after something's happened, if you're still talking about it, is it empowering? If not, then it's just a story. Let it go. And I'm just like,
Exactly. 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 But it's funny because 'cause we're so entrained to listen and talk to ourselves, do self-talk about everything that we've done wrong. How do we judge ourselves? How do we make ourselves so incredibly wrong rather than going, "That's the information. What was great about this that occurred? What information can I gather? And now what could I actually do with that information and get it on track to where it can go, you know?"
yes, yes, for sure.
Like the necessity to stick in the world of being wrong, getting it wrong, judging yourself, judging others about it, it doesn't actually move the needle.
Right. Yeah. No, I've had a lot of practice with that. You're right about that.
I know, right?
Because, once somebody told me, if you're judging, you can't really be in awareness. I'm like, oh gosh, yeah. So, it's just
True.
to be in your own awareness, you do have to step out of judgment of yourself or anyone else and just be like, so
Yeah, for
yes.
sure. For
So
sure.
if people wanted to, well, before we say if people wanted to contact you, can you speak more about what services? I mean, in your intro, we talked about it, but what services do you like to offer to people when they are contacting you?
Oh, that's another great question. Um, I do a lot of personal facilitation with people of all ages. And really and coaching, but I tend to like facilitation because of how quickly it changes things versus traditional coaching, which is step by step and it's a lot of work and it can take a long time to have something be different and it's more process related. So I prefer transformational work, which is like, let's look at what it really is and change it. And you can get things changed or be different in even 5 minutes. So it's not like you have to be spending hours and hours on it. And the other piece I'm really working with now is schools and corporations and groups to have them thrive and work from a place that totally works for them. Um, so that the way that the construct of the world has been, we actually create something entirely different. So it actually is workable and is workable towards the future. So I would say those are the two places I play the most. I do all kinds of things, but those would be the ones that I totally enjoy.
Great. Yes, I know you have like the quantum um when I hear about quantum, I can't even put the word medical and quantum together, but the quantum healing piece is really appealing to me because it addresses more the whole body and not just the physical body, but the energetic body. So it's a fun field to play in. So how can people what's the best way for people to reach you or find you if they'd like to do that?
I guess the easiest way is just go to my website, which is drterriehope.com. And there's a thing on there under work with me. You'll see a place where you can, book some time or get to know me, or and I can get to know you, and we can see what it is that how I can contribute to you.
Great. Well, I'll also put that link in below when once this is posted on YouTube so people can access it that way. So thanks so much for being willing to come on today and for continuing the conversation that we started in Costa Rica, but in a
Yeah.
way where other people can benefit as well.
Yeah.
So
Thank you so much.
yeah, nice having you on. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. See you soon.